All right. Good morning, SCLA. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started for the day. Has everybody had a good time so far? It's hard to believe that it's the last day. It's been quite a conference. Hopefully everybody enjoyed the dinner last night, and congratulations again to Ferguson for the Center of Excellence Award, Circle of Excellence Award. All right, so today is the last day, but it is action-packed. We have 3 more great sessions with some incredible panelists, and we've got one more peer session, so one more chance to connect. Hopefully you all have made the 5 connections that Ammie challenged you to make, and if you haven't, you have one more chance to do that today. If you have any complaints about the temperature, you can send those to Marcus. I think we actually got it fixed. It feels a little better today. All right. And then we're going to end the day with a pitch tank of some really innovative companies, so please don't check out before that. It's going to be an awesome way to end the day. And then, of course, Amy's going to have some prizes to offer at the end of the day as well for those who stayed through. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome up our Claudia and our first panel for the day. So please give them a round of applause. And we're looking forward to hear from this great group.
Good morning, everyone. Morning, everybody awake? Okay, good. Ready to listen in on this conversation. The title here is Playing to Win, How to Accelerate C-Suite Influence and Elevate Your Team. It's a big topic, kind of a meaty topic. And luckily, what we've got here today are 5 esteemed panelists. I don't think they really need any introduction. And again, congratulations, Michael, on the Circle of Excellence Award last night. Decades of experience across these 5 panelists, and what's great is diverse industries as well. So I think the stories they'll be able to recount will be relevant for many of you, and lots of lessons learned. What we want to do today, and we challenge this panel with really 2 objectives. One, they're going to share their personal reflections on really the evolution of their supply chain organization, probably recounting for us some stories about the influence and the stature of their supply chain function within their organization. And then also, again, per the title, we want to talk about how they've elevated their teams along the way. If there's more spotlight on the function, how has their team kind of brought all of that to life? And I'm sure there'll be some soap operas that they can recount on that front as well. So just a little bit of context setting, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but when I think of you all waking up in the morning, these are the people that you have to think about, and it's an increasingly complex group of folks, right? And in consulting lingo, we call these people stakeholders, or these constituent stakeholders. But my guess is it's tough to wake up, like, as I say, like Snow White with birds chirping on your shoulders, right? Just sort of skipping over to breakfast and skipping into work when you're thinking about what's the pressure coming from our shareholders? What's the latest regulatory challenge that we're going to have to, worry about complying with and reporting against? The focus on your merchants, on your customers, on your end-to-end supply chain, better planning and forecasting, making sure operations run smoothly, right? The integrated business planning, that in and of itself is usually wrought with challenges and heavy on your shoulders. So my guess is these are the things that you wake up in the morning and think about, and you and your teams talk about. And so we as a panel, we talked a bit in prep about the evolution of this function. And again, like any good consultant, I thought about putting this in sort of a from to, and you can all think about where you might be on these different aspects. So everything from your sourcing strategy, probably historically cost-driven, exercising your leverage across your supply chain. Now with all of the crises that we've had, there's an emphasis on the breadth and diversity of your supply chain and pulling in other functions for input. Working capital, that's sort of classic to just in time to just get it right inventory. Planning and forecasting, like I mentioned, I feel like that's an increasingly complex process that you tend to lead. And while that was something that tended to be a bit manual, right? We've got more technologies to help us, more information to help us, but everybody talks about being increasingly agile when it comes to planning and forecasting. Simply said, but sort of difficult to execute. Your manufacturing and distribution strategies tended to be very service level focused, relatively centralized. Now this is, again, complex web and a balance of service with risk. Regulatory compliance, you guys have talked a lot about that in the last 2 days. Much more global, much more multifaceted in just the volume of the global set of challenges that comes through. And then last but not least, I thought this was an interesting one. When you think about what insight and analytics tended to look at, usually a retrospective, a good view of your history. How did it get done? Very localized dashboards, different tools. But what are you all migrating to? Something that's much more sophisticated. I know some of you have wholesale digital twins that are simulations of your supply chain, allowing you to do all sorts of sophisticated and forward-looking analysis. So in essence, what we've got is getting from something that was relatively linear, straightforward, increasingly complex, and interconnected. So hopefully that's a good representation of what you all have to think about, what you're challenged with, and what your teams are challenged with. With that, we would love to actually take your pulse and have our first of 3 polling questions. So this one just asks you to reflect over the last 3 to 5 years. And to what degree do you believe your role as a supply chain leader has evolved? Your role as a supply chain leader. A is complete transformation, totally different than what it was. Considerable evolution is B. Moderate change is C, or stayed the course. So if we could get you to bring up the app and answer the poll question for us. I'm watching the number of respondents come in there in the top right-hand corner, and we'll take a pulse when we get a good number of you. I know we need a few more respondents, right, Amy? You guys could, I know it might take you a while to warm up your phone and get to it, so we'll give you a minute. All right, we're up to 10 respondents. We'd like a few more. Well, I've got to say, and I think the panel here would agree with me, a significant majority of you have answered A. Significantly more value has been, or more attention paid to you as evolution as the leader. I think they're all going to that first response. We can move on to the next poll question, Matt. Poll question 2, over the past 3 to 5 years, this is a little different. The first one was about you as a leader. This is how much value do you think is placed on your supply chain function and the strategic importance of it to the organization. So A, significantly more value, B, moderately more value, C, minimal to no increase in the value, or D, you're not sure, you can't tell. I'll give you a minute to respond there. So again, similarly to your role as a leader, significantly more value. So we've got your role highly evolving in the last 3 to 5 years, and much more, as I would put it, much more of a spotlight placed on your function. So I think from a flight check standpoint, we're all here in the right conversation. I think you would all be interested in what these panelists have to say. So let's get started with our questions. Renee, if it's okay with you, I'm going to start with you. You're a seasoned panelist. I know we were on a panel together last year. Talking with a lot of you as we talk about the evolution of supply chain, we can't avoid the impact of the pandemic, right? Just the altering state of that event and post that event. So Renee, if I could start with you, and if you can share with the audience, how did you approach your role as a supply chain leader during that time?
So if we go back to that environment, nobody was allowed back at work. By the way, I remember the date very well. I think it was March 19th of 2020. They kicked me and the rest of the supply chain team out of the office because they told us it wasn't safe. And then you remember during that time frame, everybody worked from home. But one thing was in the tech space, we also got hit with the chip shortage. And I know it hit everybody in this room one way or another, whether you're ordering an appliance, ordering a car, or just trying to go to the store to get something. Chips were not, I'll say there was a huge shortage. We just didn't have enough. So how do you go and mobilize a team that you physically can't be around? And that you not only have a pandemic where people are getting sick, where people are worried about their lives, and then we have to worry about a chip shortage as well. And when you look at it, we did a couple things, and I'll tell you, coming into, we had to get back to work. So the first thing we did, we had to get around each other. Now I know this question, and I think Don asked it on Monday, was, you know, do you believe in working in-house versus working from home? And I'll tell you, a supply chain team needs to collaborate. A supply chain team needs the energy of one another. So we got ourselves back in the office. We became the hottest commodity in the world at that point. And the unique thing about it was the executives, or I should say the people above us, everybody was terrified of what was going on. And if you look at that time, we knew that we had to deliver for our client. So we threw every other KPI out the door. Now, I know this may not sound very realistic, but we threw every KPI out the door, and we concentrated on our clients. And because we concentrated on our clients, you know, we were one of the first factories up. Our factories in Mexico never went down. Our factory in Europe continually was up and processing. So it was extremely important for us to make sure our clients were taken care of. Because of that, we ended up weaponizing the supply chain. And I think Ben spoke about this a year ago. But when you weaponize, that means, and it was all around the clients, we ended up growing $10 billion during that time frame. And I don't think we were anything unique. We just worried about our clients. And that gave and elevated the supply chain, which was one of the functions, into something much, much, much more. Which, you know, it's about time that we got a seat at the table. We did have a seat at the table. It wasn't a strong seat at the table. Now we had a strong seat at the table, right?
Well, the term weaponized probably sticks with everybody, right? Maybe add that to your to-do list about how to think about your function and your role in a very proactive way. Ammie, if I might ask you to give your perspective. Again, the original question was, you know, during the pandemic, what sort of approach did you take as a supply chain leader?
Yeah, so we had two unique challenges. First was to keep the pharmaceutical supply chain running. Second was to stand up the COVID vaccine supply chain for the US government. So the first was focus on our people, just like you were talking about, focus on your client. We had to focus on our people, and we had three missions. One was keep them safe. 2 was get them to come to work because everyone was scared and we were asking our front line to come to work. And then by doing that, we were going to keep the supply chain running. What was very interesting from that is at the height of the pandemic and at the very beginning of 21, we knew we were going to have a challenge with attendance. It's typical that their banks reset, and beginning of the year we have a lot of people call off, plus the COVID pandemic. We had over 400 people across the United States from our own organization just volunteer to go work in our distribution centers. Sales team members, office members, and the gratification and the appreciation that came from that was pretty powerful for our entire organization to come back with stories. We had one gentleman who volunteered 8 weeks in a row in our Houston distribution center, and when we asked him why, because they would volunteer on Sunday night and Monday night, he said, my mom has cancer, and I want to make sure that whether I'm picking her medication or someone else's medication, I'm making a difference. And so that was really powerful. But when you flip to the second supply chain that we had to build for the COVID vaccine, that's when the attention at our board, as well as our executive level, really heightened. Because now we were going to be tasked with shipping much more frozen vaccine. Our board wanted more information about refrigerated and frozen products than I have ever had questions asked. So the elevation came very quickly for us, and I spent a lot of time educating our executive team, as did some of the members of McKesson that are here in the audience and other team members, but really understanding what it was going to take and the fact that we could not fail on the mission that we were given. So it really made a big difference.
In your organization's mission, and I know in reporters or stories that I've read about you, I loved how you talk about we're not just picking product, right? We're
for us, it's a package, not a patient, and I think it resonates with everyone, especially the story I told. But that's kind of just deep ingrained in our culture and just in our DNA, is that every piece we pick, there's a patient at the end waiting for that delivery, whether it's a critical medication or it's just an aspirin. We treat it that patient is the most important person in our culture.
I love the theme there between Renee and Ammie, just really sort of changing the mindset about the position of the supply chain function in the organization, really mobilizing around a mission, a broader objective. I love the language. Language is powerful, right, for you all as leaders with your own teams across your organizations. That's wonderful examples. Thank you both. So clearly the pandemic and frankly all times of crisis, they've resulted in a brighter spotlight on supply chain leaders, but also supply chain teams. We've heard teams mentioned in all of the speeches, I think, last night. Michael, you certainly lauded your team and always do so in our conversations. Raina, if I can take this question to you, can you share with the audience how you've handled the spotlight on your teams, handled that increased attention?
Thanks, Claudia. So I think just alongside some of my teammates here, I would say that we definitely had an opportunity to elevate what we were doing during that pandemic. And I think if you think about the pandemic was, again, the biggest one and probably the one we remember the most because it's closest to us. But we've gone through many supply chain disruptions, I think, as a group and in organizations. And I think part of the challenge is really helping ensuring that during those crises, you leave your mark in terms of how your team is really handling those situations. And I think in this particular case, there was an opportunity for us to basically look at a couple of things. Many of us in the room, I'm sure, had to shut down supply chains. There were certain things that we weren't capable of doing because we couldn't open our stores, as an example, if you're in retail. So it was a lot of things that built up over that pandemic time that I think allowed us to show what we were capable of doing. One, shutting down a supply chain that we'd never done before. Two, basically helping lead the organization just in terms of what we needed to do to help in this particular crisis. So I think we had quite a bit of focus, and people were looking to us to come up with answers and responses, and I think that allowed us to, again, elevate what we were doing and what we'd been doing, quite frankly, but really heighten that visibility, and we're able to share with our senior executive team really some of the work that we were putting together to try and help us through that process. And I think it was visible, I think, all the way across. At the beginning, there was, I think, some concerns about were we going to, be able to get product back in. So we had this opportunity to close, and then it was everybody had to ramp back up. And I think, again, as I talk to many of my peers in this room and some of the people in the retail sector, some of those challenges were a bit daunting, given the fact that there was concern, and I don't know how many of you remember, there was concern about what would happen with drivers if drivers got COVID. We already had a shortage. What would happen in case we ended up with a driver fleet that was unable to create the capacity that we needed on the ramp up? So those were daunting questions and a lot of uncertainty. And so I think it really came down to the communication, that we really had to create a cadence of consistent communication around what we were doing and how we were supporting the business. And I think many of us learned that that was probably the opportunity for us to, again, get in front of the senior leadership, help them understand what we were going through. And in our particular case, we had a chance to do that consistently. And as a result, the team had worked incredible hours, and I can't tell you how much I value the team. The team knows. I tell them all the time, I love the team. I think they're incredible people. They're committed. And so what we had a chance to do was basically I went to our CEO and asked our CEO, would you do me a favor and come in and do a thank you? Because we did coffee chats. One of the things that we maintained during that process was looking at how we could communicate with our teams and ensure that they were doing well and how they were feeling about things working remotely. And so I asked if he would participate in what we called a coffee chat. And he said, oh, don't worry, Raina, not a coffee chat. I'll do a town hall for your team. So we definitely had visibility, and I think it gave our CEO a chance to really hear from the team about the hard work that they put in and was able to thank them. And I think that was one of the first times that the team had a chance to really see him one-on-one, though virtually, but a great chance for us to elevate the work we were doing.
I think you mentioned that town hall was scheduled for 30, 40 minutes or something, and it ended up going...
We did. We went several hours, actually. So it was great. There was a lot of exchange and a lot of appreciation. The team was fabulous that day.
Wonderful example. Thank you. Ammie, can I ask for your perspective about that spotlight, not only on you as the leader, but on your teams and how you all navigated that together?
Lots of examples to complement, right? Newsletters, when COVID hit, everybody wanted to know every detail of the supply chain that had never wanted to know anything about the supply chain. You're like, oh, look at you. So lots of phone calls, right? You're like answering the phone, what's going on? And who wants to know what? Really what we tried to reapply, and it's still in effect today, is the leadership on the floor. So in that, when you think about in our manufacturing sites, people, our leaders, executives will fly all over the world and visit the plants and walk the floor and get engaged and understand what's going on, and reapplying that into our planning service centers and reapplying that into our supply chain and bringing those leaders in and having them walk the floor, attend our daily direction setting meetings, understand the lengths and the risk that we talk every day as part of our normal work. This isn't something we just did because it was COVID. This is something you maybe just weren't familiar with and weren't in touch with. And so bringing them in and having them do that, and we're still doing those. So once a quarter, the top levels of our company will come visit a region, and they go visit the plants, but now they come and visit and look at our scorecards and look at our measures and engage with the folks that are on the floor in the planning organization to continue to highlight the work they're doing, not in case of an emergency. So it's really kind of helped bring to life the value that the supply chain teams bring and deliver every day in a very natural way with our leaders going forward.
Love it. So obviously an increased level of interest, curiosity, inquiry on our supply chains coming out of the pandemic. But the challenges never end, right? But we get this phrase gets tossed out around a lot, being a value-added function. What are you doing today to be more of a value-added function? So I'm curious, Michael, our Circle of Excellence Award winner, curious on your perspectives. How have your teams taken on the seemingly ever-present challenge of being a value-added function in the organization?
Sure, value-added function. Many years ago, I started my career in supply chain, and I reported to a gentleman named Mike Cronin. And Mike Cronin explained to me, how do you know you're doing a good job? And you know you're doing a good job because no one is looking for you. Your in-stocks are good, your product is on time and full, you're receiving, you're shipping, And if no one is looking for you, you are doing a great job. We are a value-added function. And I hated that. And so I said to him, well, if we're a value-added function, what are the merchants and what are the store operations people? He said, oh, those are the drivers of the business. And I said, well, how does supply chain become a driver of the business? And he said, we're not, we're a function. We support the drivers of the business. And it got me thinking, and I said, boy, I never want to be a value-added function. What I want to be is valuable. I want to be valuable to the organization. I want to drive the organization so that I'm part of the solution of driving the growth of the company. Because that's really the value that we all add at the end of the day. Accounting, we all love accountants. They're a value-added function, right? Human resources, we all love human resources. They're a value-oriented group. But supply chain, to step out in front, needs to think differently. So as I became more senior in the organization, the question I asked is, to develop the right vision, the right strategies, what do I need to do? And so I started looking outside of the industry. Sure, I looked at my competitors. I wanted to understand what they were doing. I needed to understand them. But who was the best in the world at supply chain? And you know, in thinking about it, and certainly there's a lot of world-class supply chains up here, so not to take away from anyone up here because everyone is great in their own right, I kind of focused on Amazon. And as we kind of started to develop our vision, I thought to myself, well, what are they working on? What's their vision? What are their strategies? And where are they going to be in 5 to 7 years? Where is the puck going, not where is it today? And so at Ferguson, as we started to develop our vision for the future, we asked the question, what if, we'll start with that, what if we could be as good as Amazon at everything that they do, but better than them at what we do? What would we need to do? And certainly Amazon is a massive company with almost unlimited resources. They don't live quarter to quarter. They live year to year, decade to decade. And if you look at Amazon in 2000, they just broke $1 billion. And this year, they'll be one of the largest companies in the world, if not the largest in the world. And so you look at what they're good at, and they're good at a lot of things. Their same-day delivery program, where you order and you receive your product in a couple of hours in the major MSAs, is fantastic. Their private fleet is larger than UPS or FedEx. Their technology is the best in the world. How simple is it to do business with Amazon? They use robotics, and actually, to the extent Amazon has announced that within this next decade, they will have humanless distribution centers, that they will be completely automated. And that's where the puck is going. So at Ferguson, as we started looking at what we need to be, we started looking at that as our value that we bring to the organization, that we would be not a value-added function, but a competitive weapon. We will be the difference on how we win in the market. And yes, there's a lot of companies that sell plumbing supplies, and most of the companies are much smaller than we are. But that doesn't change the fact that at some point in our lives, we're going to be up against Amazon, and we're going to go toe-to-toe. And although every David and Goliath story has a weakness with Goliath, Amazon has soft spots. And we say we can beat them at our game because we're better at what we do than they are, but they're better at everything else when it comes to supply chain because of the level of investment. And so the example I'll give is that when I started with the organization, our fulfillment network was full. We're a growth company, we're growing, and we need to do something to expand the network. Most of our distribution centers are expandable. And so the easy answer would be expand the DCs that you have and fill any holes in the country that you need to fill. But we said to ourselves, where is the puck going? And we came up with this strategy, as we talked about during the conference, that we were going to open up fulfillment centers in every MSA across the United States. And most of you know it as, I call it every NFL city. Our colleagues in Canada call it NHL city. But we were going to open up in every NFL city and put a significant amount of inventory there, bypass the branches, and go direct to customer. Because in the past, everything went through a branch and then would go to the customer. It added a ton of time, a ton of cost, and was it really adding value? So our decision was we were going to be not only the best next day company, which is what we were in terms of deliveries, but the best same day company. We then opened up in our new buildings 24/7 access to our inventory for our customers. We were able to do same day delivery, and in most cases, because of the robotics we put in our buildings, what used to take us an hour to an hour and a half to fulfill, we could fill in under 10 minutes. And so the direction that we chose is we want to be valuable. We want to be the difference on why Ferguson wins in the market. And now, when you look at the Ferguson organization, we have supply chain expertise on our board of directors. We have supply chain expertise on our executive committee within the organization. And we have come out of the shadows, and now we're in the spotlight on a driver of the business. Not only that, the sales organizations have moved 100 of their sales offices and ship hubs under supply chain. So now, supply chain is in every sales meeting. And again, it's about not just adding value as a function. And if you look at yourself as a function like accounting or HR, that's certainly one way to look at supply chain. But I would submit to you that kind of the new view is how do you become a competitive weapon or the difference on how you become a growth company, putting supply chain right up there with the merchants and the store operations group.
There's some profound examples, I think, that show supply chain isn't sort of a petri dish within the organization, right? Interconnected to the rest of the organization. I love this notion of turning the head of being a value-added function to being just truly valuable and value driving for the organization. Renee, I think you have some thoughts on this topic as well.
So I do. I have a couple examples. So when I was younger in my career, sales always perceived supply chain as, we'll tell you what to do, and just do it. And don't ask any questions. And I'm sure all of you have been through that. And I remember one instance when I got to a position where I could influence things. One of our supply chain professionals shot me over an email and said, "Can you believe I got this email from this salesperson?" And it basically said, you know, "John, thanks a lot for your opinions, but when I want them, I'll ask for them. Just ship the damn things." That's pretty bad, huh? So what did I do? I picked up the phone and I called the sales guy, because at the end of everybody's email, they always have phone numbers. And I picked it up and I said, "Hi, Sam, how you doing?" And he goes, "Who's this?" And I said, "It's Renee Ure, how you doing?" And he stopped and there was silence. I said, "Don't you ever, you treat people equally, and don't you ever talk to somebody like that." So that's how I grew up in supply chain, right? They looked upon us as do as you're told. We don't want you to think, just do, right? So the next example I'll give is at Lenovo, a company that, an acquisition that came over from IBM. IBM couldn't make it successful. They transferred, Lenovo bought it, and Lenovo decided we're going to get into the cloud business. And for those of you who don't know, from a cloud perspective, they buy close to 80 to 90% of high-end servers in the world, right? All the big cloud guys. I say the 8 big cloud guys. So Lenovo, having a lot of adversity, because we are, so I keep saying we, I can't get rid of it, sorry. But our heritage is Chinese. Now there's a lot of other different cultures in there, but our main heritage really was Chinese. So everybody in the US, when you say Chinese, it was negative, right? A lot of spies, a lot of, stealing of intellectual property. So we had to overcome a lot, and we knew it was going to be tough, but we knew we needed a different approach. And that different approach was taking a group that everybody considered value add and then mobilizing them to be the front line. So it's almost as if we kind of push sales out of the way. Sales was there for the bougie stuff. They like to take people to dinner. They like to drink wine. But the people that we put in front of it were the people that dealt with the client. When you have two groups and you have an operational group talking to an operational group in the customer side, beautiful things happen. And one thing we found, year one, I think we did 50 million. And these machines are pretty expensive. You know, any rack that you have could be $1 million a piece. And at any given time, we would send clusters out, which is 20 racks, and to data centers. What we've created, and what Ben Massey and his team sitting around that table have created, is really a business model that they replicated that's now doing billions of dollars of business. From $50 million, I think they did $3 billion just in cloud, for the last 2 quarters. Very, very different. Putting supply chain operational people talking to customer operational people. And it works. And the beauty here is it's now an avenue for supply chain people and a career path for supply chain people that they didn't have before. They're talking to the big clients. So, always look at a business problem and try to get the non-essentials out of it so that you can really, streamline your process. So that's my example.
Well, I love the theme across both of your stories, right? This kind of out from I picture like a windowless basement room or something of, supply chain folks bringing in product. So out from the shadows, a seat at the table in your organizations, right? A meaningful seat in the decision-making table, but also this direct interaction with the customer in a way that moves the needle. I know, Michael, we read you were featured in a Forbes article, and you punctuated this very point that you and Renee just made, that taking it from, low-cost product in the door to truly helping to differentiate your organizations and making a difference with your customer. I think that's such a powerful notion. Let's continue on that a little bit, because we also talk about whether it's value added. I love the notion of being more valuable to your companies. But there's also this sort of theme of making sure that your supply chain strategy connects to the overall business strategy, where your company's headed, where the puck is going, Michael, as you said, how it wants to grow. Ammie, I'm wondering if you could give your thoughts. I think you have a lot of passion around this topic about the positioning of supply chain in relation to the business strategy of the company.
You got it. So if you think about yesterday when we talked the pair model, right? So I will complement that. We were driving productivity, billions of dollars year over year for the company, the supply chain. That was our value add. And then what you can see is during COVID, when we could take a Tide line and make hand sanitizer for the government within 30 days. When you could look at our competition who couldn't fill a shelf, but we could fill it and take their spots. When you look at the value that we delivered and the recognition for that, our CEO was on a call maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and they were asking about, where are you going next? And how's P&G going to drive this? And he's like, oh, we have Supply 3.0. And of course, all of us in the supply chain were like, what's Supply 3.0? We got to go make it up. He was like, yeah, it's all about our supply chain. It's a growth strategy for us. And, so really, his awareness and acknowledgement of the value that we had driven over the years, and then externally sharing that as a growth strategy, it is now formally communicated and externally shared as one of the 4 planks for how we're driving the growth for the company is through the supply chain. And I will tell you that on a personal level, we meet, right, as Sherbella shared yesterday, we meet with a ton of companies regularly that are non-competes that we sell our IP to. And we had a company reach out to us based in Europe, I won't tell you who it is, that reached out to us and said, hey, our comms leader and our supply chain leader would like to meet with you. And I was like, what is this about? We don't sell that in our IP, but we want to meet with you and talk about supply chain as a growth strategy. So I said, okay, we'll take the call. And so I brought in my comms person and we met. And they were like, well, how do you get people to listen to you in the boardroom? How do you get a seat at the table? And I said, before we go any further, one question for you. Where is supply chain in your P&L? And they were like, what do you mean? I go, are you an overhead allocated cost? Or are you part of the P&L and you're seen by the GM or the president of the region or of the country as a way to deliver their P&L, bottom and top line? Well, we're part of an international cost. And I was like, well, then we need to stop right there because they're not seeing you as a growth strategy to deliver their goals. They might think that they're talking to you and that they need you because they need the product, as we said, just ship it. But really thinking differently about how your company is put together in the seat that you have at the table. Do you truly have a seat or are you an overhead allocated cost? Because as long as you're an overhead allocated cost, you're going to be challenged with being able to be an active growth strategy for your company. And I don't know where that resonates with you in the audience, and it's not meant to like depress you if you're an overhead allocated cost. But I do think you need to have a conversation, and it's got to start with pivoting there. And if you are an overhead allocated cost, how do you not be lumped in with an international cost, right? How do you start to stratify with your financial leaders what portion of that overhead allocated? Now, sometimes you don't want to share that, but hopefully you're okay. But if you're 50% of it or if you're 20% of it, how are you going to take that 20% and bring that to the table and show what you're going to do to take that 20% and reduce it? So if you are part of the P&L, you are dependent, you're looked at to deliver your goals and your benefits for everybody. So I share that with you as, again, super passionate in this space, but we have companies time after time that come to us and they're like, well, how do you do this? And how do you make this work? And I'm like, we have a seat at the table and our sales team and our commercial teams need us. We have an operating strategy aligned with them. Every year it is signed off by the presidents that we agree that the supply chain is going to deliver this and that sales is going to deliver this and we're going to do it together. And that operating strategy is then developed into planning parameters in our ERP systems. And then we have an operating strategy to deliver our cost goals at our plants. All of that is seamlessly put together. You don't have a commercial person that says, look what I'm going to go do in sales. They're doing it with the supply chain and with the plants. And that's an annual exercise that we do every single year to ensure that seat at the table, that we are the growth strategy, that we are going to deliver and help both the top line and the bottom line.
It's such an interesting lever to look at, right? And the culture then that kind of exacerbates. Are you sort of a surcharge or a tax on your business divisions, right? Or are you a partner helping them drive the business?
We need you on that wall. We want you on that wall. Yeah.
Michael, how about you? I know you've got thoughts on this topic, this whole connection of supply chain strategy to the broader business strategy.
Sure. How many people here work for a matrix managed organization? Anyone?
Matrix
managed organization. If you are in one, and there's a number of people who are, you realize how complex business has gotten. Who owns the P&L? Who owns the decision? As supply chain comes out from a backroom function to now a sales driving function, if you don't have aligned goals with the sales team, you will have dysfunction. People will be working against each other, especially in a matrix-driven, complex, large organization. So the need for supply chain and sales to have the same goals is very important. If you're focused on productivity and someone else is focused on driving growth in the business, they are in direct conflict. So certainly we drive productivity. I mean, we're a supply chain organization, but our success, our first success, comes now with things like Net Promoter Score, things like customer satisfaction levels, and we're tied to the sales organization with that. And it's interesting because if a salesman makes a commitment that's unreasonable, we both fail. If we do not manage a customer properly, now that we are managing customers and customer relationships, the salesperson fails and we will fail. So the alignment of goals and coming to a consensus on what that is the first step to managing effectively on the sales side of the business. You can have conflicting goals. Now, having said that, matrix organizations and aligned goals and transformation is not for the faint of heart. There is, even after you align goals, there's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of learning curve for both sides. I used to control this, now I influence this. It's a process, and it takes time, and it's not for the faint of heart. You need to be thick-skinned. You need to understand that the first time you align goals, it's not going to be perfect, but it's a step forward. And then it's going to iterate, 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 because every time an exception comes up, there'll be a change to the goal until finally it becomes stable. So if you're going to come out from a value-weighted function to be valuable to the organization has to have one set of goals and not goals by function.
I'm curious, and this wasn't discussed in our flow, so I'll throw this out. But I think we've hit on a topic where if supply chain has an increasing a chair with increasing influence, right? If you think about a kitchen table, and you've got a more prominent seat at that kitchen table, there's probably some other functions whose seats got a little pushed in, right? They're a little uncomfortable with your bigger seat. I'm just kind of curious, as you all think through the reality of these past few years and having that bigger seat. You certainly shared stories on how you've capitalized on that bigger seat. I love this idea of shared metrics, and that's not easy. But any other stories or lessons learned? It's probably not all happy stories, but maybe just some lessons learned or better practices on what else happened around that table with some of the other functions. Sales is one you mentioned. Just curious if there's any stories that come to mind.
I think that's a great question, Claudia, just in terms of how are we able to influence. So I think it's great to hear that you have that bottom line not as an import cost, but really thinking about how you're aligned. So I know there's probably lots of organizations out there, and I've worked at several, that is not the case. And I've also worked in one where we're actually, rather than being a cost of the bottom line, we were actually in the food industry. They do it a little bit differently. They actually earn income on top of freight. So that was an opportunity that I had to sit in a totally different place where they were looking for us to drive money to the bottom line. And what I would say is that in total, if I think about all the different roles that I've had and the organizations that I've worked in, I think what's really important is that word influence. And I think sometimes we can get frustrated. In fact, I just shared with a couple of the team here on one of our calls recently that Gartner's was reflecting in their last report in 2023 that the seat at the table or the view of the supply chain is dropping. So while it was heightened during the pandemic and there was a lot of concern about what supply chain was going to do to support the businesses, that's actually waning now. So one of the things that I think is really important to think about, and for all of us in this room, is to how do we continue to maintain that influence and not to let that erode simply because we're not in a pandemic. And I think those are things that we have to think about. Why I mentioned earlier that I think it's important with a cadence. What's the regular and consistent communication that you're sharing across the organization? Not simply to a senior level CEO or your boss, but it may be how are you influencing and sharing that information broadly across your entire senior group so they continue to hear the value, to your point, Michael. What's the value that we're delivering? So how do we consistently show up and how we're influencing those people around us so that they hear? And so what we've done is we've tied the goals that we have in our organization to the CEO goals for the company. And that way, there's a direct correlation, so we can start to speak to how are we supporting profitable sales? What are the things that we're doing that are influencing those goals? And I think that's important for all of us to continue to maintain as we're seeing a little less engagement in terms of the CEOs and the senior level in terms of supply chain. So I think that's going to be critical for us going forward, and really continuing to maintain that is going to be critical for us. And think about the disruptions are going to continue to come, and you don't want to have to keep going back to explain why you're so important. If you continue to maintain that, that will keep you in a position that, again, they'll look to us to continue to drive that value.
I'd add, I think, along those same lines and what everyone has said, just in terms of the strategy, we're the enabler. Supply chain is the enabler to the growth. And we've found, never waste a good crisis, right? We had a situation last year where we weren't connected to a team that was negotiating a contract and writing checks that we couldn't cash in the operations. And nothing like that to happen to all of a sudden get a better seat at the table. Instead of someone speaking for supply chain, I was at the table. And so I think, again, you don't want to waste that crisis, but sometimes that's what it takes for some individuals to say, wow, we should have brought supply chain along in that conversation rather than relay the information and leave a lot of questions unasked, because there's so many times you have the next question that's going to unlock the absolute brilliance in the solution, but the people at the table don't know to ask that question. So I think that's where supply chain is really starting to heighten and create the value creation, but valuable, but really enable the growth or the solutions that companies are looking for.
I like the idea of this notion. What made me, the word that kind of kept running through my mind when both of you were speaking is, what insights are you bringing, right? We had that as an element on that continuum slide a few minutes ago. But what insights are you bringing, given where you sit, what your vantage point is, what your team's vantage point is in the organization? What insights are you bringing to that kitchen table that is your leadership table? And frankly, from where I sit, seeing clients across manufacturing sectors, that's a challenge for every part of the organization, right? Your CHRO is thinking the same thing. How can I provide some valuable insight about our organization's talent and how that talent is evolving? More strategic CHROs are bringing that to those conversations, and you guys bring up the exact same dynamic here. As a supply chain leader, as a supply chain team, every week, are you challenging yourself when you get to that leadership table? What insights are you bringing that can impact the growth of the business? I love the notion. So we've talked a lot about the evolution of the function, how we've gotten to where we are today. How do we make the most of that? But with this next question, I want to just ask about some maybe crystal ball predictions in terms of where supply chain, you all as leaders and your teams might be heading, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years. So Ammie, if you don't mind, if you could look into your crystal ball, let us know what you think.
I'm not sure, but my crystal ball might be filled with Thornhill wine, so I'm just letting you know. But no, I think we've talked a lot about the AI, the automation. We're going to have less and less human capital available to us. And so how do we leverage all the technology and all the tools so that you can leverage those valuable assets to work on the most critical problems? And I think that's where we're headed. It's not revelation or anything like that. But for you as leaders, what became apparently clear to me a few years ago when I was tapped to sit on a board of directors for a privately held company was the value that boards are now seeing and that companies are now seeing for board members that have supply chain experience. And at that point, I was not even thinking about it. I had been doing some board training, and I thought, maybe. And I took the call, and I took the interview, and I was rewarded with earning a spot on this company's board. And for me, it's really opened up my eyes, one, to come back to McKesson every day when I leave those board meetings as a better leader, because I'm asking better questions, because I look at their business differently, and then come back and bother the hell out of my team with a whole new set of questions. But I think for each of you, as you think about your future, what knowledge you're amassing right now and all the experiences, those are valuable for you many, many years down the road as companies are continuing to elevate supply chain and look for that experience on their boards to challenge them to think differently. So I think that's where supply chain is really headed as leadership. You have more opportunities than just what you're doing today.
I love that notion of board preparedness. People are going to want your perspective. They're going to want you to leverage your experience and give insight to other companies. That's a great step on a career path. One I know you're all, many of you already occupy those seats, but thinking about your career progression and what kind of board seats would you want? I love that. Raina, can I ask you for your crystal ball, and I'll throw this out to the whole panel if there's other predictions or foresight you have about where supply chain's headed.
Thanks. So I don't have much to add to Ammie. I think very similarly. I think the opportunities are going to continue from disruption. I think we all have tied on uncertainty as the second name, middle name, whatever, because we're going to continue to face that. I do think that we're continuing to see pressure. I think from the cost side, I think all of us are recognizing that those are things between labor and everything else that we're seeing, that those are going to continue to be up front and center. So I think talent, I would say, is what we've really been focusing on, is helping ensure that we're bringing the right talent, because we can bring the technology, we can bring the tools, but we also have to have the talent that's going to be able to recognize the use of those tools, et cetera. So I think that's going to be critical for all of us to continue to look towards top talent. I think just in terms of what to expect, I think there is going to be some shifts. I think what we try to talk with our people about, there's a lot of AI. I heard from some of my team members that people bring up AI and the room goes silent. And I think there's a lot of concern that people have about, what does AI mean to me? Does that mean I'm going to lose my role? Is there going to be something different that I'm going to be tasked with that I'm not doing today? So I think it's really working with our teams and helping them prepare for what's ahead and getting them to understand the change management side of this, that these are going to be things that we're going to have to continue to contend with. The what if question, we should all be asking ourselves continually, what are those things that we need to consider? I think Michael had a great view in terms of thinking that long term and how do we continue to get better. So I think those are things we're going to have to really think about, is how do we plan for the next 5, 10, 15 years. I think oftentimes we get in supply chain, we get very focused on the next 3 to 5, and we're not necessarily thinking much further down the pike. So what we're talking about now are what are those things that we need to be considering in that 5 and 10 year space that we haven't really been thinking about because we've been too focused on some of the latest, pandemics and the other things that we've had to contend with and the disruptions. So I think it's really setting a vision out to say, what are those things that we need to be better prepared for, and start to look in that direction and that change management for our people. I think are critical.
I love the focus on, and would love to hear other panelists' perspective. If we think about the future, it made me think of what are the hot skills in the next era of supply chain professionals, in introducing that notion of change management, right? Change is a constant. So does your team have an innate sort of cool, calm confidence about them to navigate and put that face to the rest of the organization, to your supply chain ecosystem, to your merchants, to your customers? I love the introduction of that. We hadn't really talked about that yet. Ammie?
Yep, if I could add in here, I think I want to build off your talent management, because I think this is the real crux of what we're dealing with right now is, do I hire a data scientist and teach them supply chain, or do I hire supply chain and teach them data scientist? So if you can get both degrees, if you have a child in college, tell them to get both. But I really think, there's 5,000 people that work to keep Twitter up. We're creating apps like they're going out of style inside P&G, and we don't have 5,000 people to keep them relevant and real and on time, right? So I think what's in this digital space that we're headed to, and as we try and drive seamless data between all of our best of breed systems, all the way from research and development through to the sales team, as we try and drive all of that touchless. If you think about a piece of equipment in a manufacturing plant, right, we reward them to not get stopped, to not have a breakdown, to not do a touch. How do we start talking to our supply chain leaders about not touching the forecast, about not touching their production plan, right? Let Jesus take the wheel. Like, let the system do the work. And then how do we make sure that what they are value-added touching, that we build that back into the logic to be able to take the touch out, because labor is going to be scarce. We do have to think differently, but we're even trying to say, like, what does the role look like tomorrow? Is one person managing right out of college the entire supply chain because there's a black box hidden somewhere that's doing all I mean, it gets a little scary to think about, right? And so I think having these really, really conversations, command center, control tower concepts, right? Am I operating all of my production planning for the world from this one spot, right? And we're managing 5 to 6 warehouses just out of Greece right now without touching the warehouses. Everything's automated now. So there's a lot of really great things that are coming. I think the question is, what does the business continuity plan look like that with somebody right out of college with a degree? How do they get a degree to do this? And so I think it is all about talent management right now. I think I love that you said that, so I wanted to build off of it.
And there's a question from the audience, Simon. Thank you for putting it here in the app, which gets to this. It's sort of, how talent is a valuable commodity. How have you seen your organizations lure that talent in versus going to, as you said, Simon, the other company around the corner, right? We're all looking for that unicorn, right? Those set of, I love that notion, Ammie, like where's the data scientist who knows the in and outs of supply chain? But you're not the only organization that wants to hire those people, right? So anybody seen your organizations kind of step up their efforts on how do you attract that talent versus the other places that they might want to go?
So it's all about, excuse me, it's all about culture. And one thing that we knew that we had to develop within Lenovo was to develop that culture where people wanted to be part of a family. You're right, you have to fight for talent. You spend a lot of time at work. In fact, you spend almost more time at work than you do with your family. So the element of belonging to something and belonging to something special, I think, is extremely important. But it also comes with the kind of people that you bring in. I had stopped Tom. Where's Tom Goolsby? Tom, where are you? I know I saw you in here somewhere. I'm about to give you a compliment.
So you can show yourself.
He stuck out. Well, the University of Tennessee has incorporated into their supply chain program data scientists, and so it's a degree, a supply chain degree with data scientists. And it's so important because you're right. You have to attract the right people, but you have to make sure that they have the right education. And if you can get those two together, it really is extremely special. Talent in the future is going to be a problem. We don't have, and we're growing at a pace that talent is not keeping up with it. And we're going to all be fighting for that talent. So education is very important. The culture of the organization is very important. And people, and I will say this, when you pay people and you give them what their value is worth, it's a big difference. So really, the bonus structure has to be very good. So those 3 things stick out for me.
I'll go ahead. I'm noticing some of the question too is asking about how we view our associates, whether or not they are viewed as simply an employee or are they, part of the group that we serve. So I think it's really important, I think what Renee just shared on the culture side. So, we hear the term culture, but what does that really mean? And I think oftentimes there's people that have been trying to implement cultures across different organizations, and what ends up happening is oftentimes it comes to, I'm going to check a box. I met with my staff, I had a meeting for X amount of time, and I was able to share with them, I think very highly of them, check. And I think that is the opposite of what we're trying to do just in terms of culture. I think it's really important for people to feel, number one, that they're cared for. I think that those are things that people, there's that saying that says people won't want to hear what you have to say unless they know that you care. So I think it's really important for us to think about our associates. I feel like again, servant leadership to me is high on the list, and I think it's really important in terms of getting people to come on board. When you talk about recruiting and we talk about retention, it's really around how do we make people feel? Day in and day out, what do they feel? Back and taking the time, because I will tell you, I couldn't do anything without the team. And I think it's really important for them to know that and for them to get the credit. And I have a group here, and what I want to also put in is an appreciation for SCLA, because this is an opportunity where we can bring associates to this event so that they can continue to learn and develop themselves and become the leaders that we want them to be. And I think this is a huge opportunity for us to continue to leverage conferences like this and get our people informed and keep them updated just in terms of where we're going, creating that vision for them, and then really coming alongside them to say, what can we do to help enable you to feel good about your career path and make sure that we're sticking to that. I think it's really important.
I'll finish up, and I think part of it is I have 5,000 distribution associates, non-exempt, that work 24/7. And to the point that you made, how do we get them to stay at the company and not go to that company down the street that's paying 10 cents more an hour, 20 cents more an hour, because that's what's motivating for those team members. We've become really competitive, but we're not at the top of the range, and we likely will never be. But where we've invested is how do you make a day in the life of the leader that leads those people easier? And the easier we can make that person's life, that leader's life, the more time they're going to spend caring about the individuals on the floor that they lead. And so we've really taken the approach of day in the life of a leader easier makes for a better leader that cares more about the people that are working for them and delivering that patient care. So we've really just invested in our frontline leaders and some wages to make sure we're competitive.
Yeah, I love the notion of, understanding your workforce. I know when we work with manufacturing companies, they, are you showing empathy for your employees? One of the examples I'm thinking of, you may find yourself with plants in what the country would call childcare deserts, right? Places that don't have high quality, affordable childcare. And so those organizations having taken it on themselves to establish on-site childcare, or for their production floor workers that are, graveyard shifts, they're subsidizing childcare explicitly, right, at giving them, overnight help so someone can work the overnight shift, right, and stepping up the quality, the caliber of those programs that maybe you're not the highest hourly wage, but that's a huge consideration for, especially as more women coming into the workforce that we're hearing about. And then on the notion of skills and influence, looking for those skills, one of the things we've seen many organizations do, which is I think a better practice, they've gotten actively involved, and I'm sure many of your organizations are, in shaping the curriculums at universities and trade schools, and taking some of their more advanced professionals and turning them into clinical professors, right? Teaching classes about supply chain and production. People with decades of experience who probably are looking for a little bit of a change of scenery, and nothing keeps you young like facing a group of students and sharing what you know. So just something to think about, to the degree that your supply chain organizations are influencing curriculums, and think about it, you're getting first-line exposure to that talent, that as an instructor or an influencer of what they're learning, you're getting early access to those recruits and hopefully building up some stickiness. I thought it was a more innovative practice in this competitive talent environment.
Just one thing to add to that, and culture is everything. They say culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that's very true. But assuming for a moment that everyone here pays their people fairly, assuming for a moment that your benefit packages are pretty relevant to what's offered in the market, now it comes down to culture to retain people. My boss knows who I am as a person. My work is meaningful to the success of the company. My work is valued by the organization. If you can answer those three questions as yes, chances are there's a stickiness to the organization. People don't leave organizations, they leave people. And generally speaking, if you have a strong connection, whether it's in a distribution center with your hourly workforce, or a strong connection with the people in your organizations, they will continue to work for you, assuming everything else is competitive. Anyone in this room could get 10% more money right now by changing organizations, yet you don't. Why? Because your work is meaningful, you like the people you work with, and you feel that your career is important to your manager and also to the organization. And those are important things, and it doesn't matter if it's Ferguson or Procter & Gamble or Lenovo or McKesson or anyone else. People are people, and people work for people, not for organizations.
I'll take one more question. We're getting sort of the stink eye on the timer, so I just want to make sure we can move us along. But maybe I'll combine these two questions about metrics. You mentioned, Michael, and I know others have talked about things like Net Promoter Score versus just pure. I think the words you used here, John, were versus pure cost center metrics. And then there's also this notion we've been talking about of talent. Can they challenge students to think about things like leadership, not just sort of the basic fundamentals of supply chain? I'll throw both of those out to see if anybody's got anything they want to share in the closing minutes.
One thing on the metrics, it's cost, cash, service, sales, NOS. On every president, every region, every country's scorecard, that's on their bonus structure, and supply chain plays in all of those. So yes, we have CSAT, and yes, we look at NPS, but it is cost, cash, service, NOS. And all of those need to be green for the top of the top to make the big bucks. And so we have a seat at the table in every one of those areas. And, NOS for the longest time, you were like, supply chain, NOS, and, going back to the examples we shared over here, right? It starts with that partnership and enabling that to get to the shelf, to deliver the sales. On the piece, the question around supply chain programs and teaching students to think, I will be, I'll say we're not repeating what gets said in this room. Well, we're recording it. That's great. So I will tell you that we recruit supply chain majors and engineers, and we bring them both into supply chain roles. And I'm an engineer, so I'm probably a little bit biased here. But we hire engineers to be our managers because of their ability to problem solve. And what I think is happening in some of the supply chain colleges is it's a different bit of a brain, and there's not as much on the problem solving. And when you put those two side by side, you get a very different approach to the work. And so you have people that come in and are just like, there's a problem, let's solve it. I see the barrier, let me figure out how to get past it. And then I have some supply chain degreed people that will come in and they're like, okay, well, I'm gonna operate the supply chain. And so I think we need to teach folks how to problem solve, no matter the degree, because that is really where the step change difference that we see in the individuals coming in. So and I don't know anything about, I go to the other UT. So I don't know about Tennessee, but I know at Texas on the curriculum, we're having these same conversations because I'm telling them, like, I'm struggling with the folks in this space. You can give them data scientists, you can give them, which is gonna build some of those analytical that gets towards the problem solving, but I don't know that we've cracked the code in all cases on teaching the problem solving that naturally starts to come out of an engineering school. That's my biased answer.
So I do want to comment
You
here.
can disagree.
And I know that we're over time, but for the university folks out there, just like any business that's represented in this room, we talk to our clients regularly. We discuss with them what they need. We talk to them about strategy in the future. The university should be doing exactly the same thing. They should have partnerships with all different supply chain industries so that they know the needs of the future. And if you're not doing that from a business standpoint, you should be partnered with universities. And for the university folks, you should have almost like a council that you do on a regular basis, whether it's every 6 months, whether it's every year, of the different supply chain industries, asking them, where are we going? What are your needs? What skills do these kids have to have coming out of schools? And if that happens, then that communication and hopefully, will fill a gap that we have today. Right?
So we
We covered a lot of ground in this conversation. Remember, we challenged these 5 panelists with sharing personal reflections on the evolution of their supply chain function, their role as a leader, and certainly the implications for their team. I think they more than met those challenges, so can we have a round of applause for our esteemed panelists? Thank you all so much.